So can I retire in Nashville with $1 million? Well, not only is Nashville known as Music City and a very popular destination for bachelorettes, it's also become a top choice for retirees. In fact, we have over 100 people per day moving into the Middle Tennessee area, and that's for a lot of reasons. One of those is we do get nice weather here. We get 4 seasons. That's rare in a lot of areas, and so the summers aren't too hot, and when they get too hot, by that time fall is here. And when winter comes around, we don't get too harsh of winters. And when you get tired of winter, then spring's here. And so it is nice to have all of the seasons here in Middle Tennessee. Also, we have a lot of retirees coming here to follow kids that are getting jobs in the area. It's a booming area for Amazon and Oracle, Mitsubishi. There's a lot of major corporations moving headquarters into the Middle Tennessee area. That means a lot of new jobs in our area. And so we're finding a lot of retirees are following their children or grandchildren and to be a little closer to them. One of the big ones, no state income tax. So a lot of people are coming into Middle Tennessee or love Middle Tennessee and Nashville because we don't have a state income tax. And also we have relatively low property taxes compared to most areas. I meet a lot of people moving here from bigger cities, Chicago, New York, California, and property taxes in those areas could easily be on a range of around $15,000, give or take on either side of that per year. For a lot of folks, that's a mortgage payment that they're paying, and we can see the property taxes in our area maybe between $3,000, $5,000 on the high side, depending on the type of home that you buy. So favorable taxes, property taxes, weather, things of that nature. So how do you know if you're going to be able to retire comfortably here in Middle Tennessee, in Nashville, with $1 million? Well, there is a plan that you have to follow. And these are some of the items that you're going to have to be able to identify and have a plan for as you move forward into retirement to know, can you have a successful retirement here in Nashville? Number one, and the most important item to be able to identify and spend time on is income. Income is the outcome. We need to have a buttoned up income plan that we know is going to be reliable, predictable, sustainable through all types of market conditions and chaos that happens in the world on a regular basis these days. So when it comes to income planning, there are some things that you need to do and a list that you can work yourself through to be able to come up with what is that total income need that I'm going to have in my retirement years. Number one, we need to be able to identify the sources of income that you're going to have. So in retirement, Social Security is going to be a main component. If you're fortunate enough, you can have a pension. So a pension plan and how much money that can bring in. And then if you have rental properties, things of that nature. Being able to identify the sources of income and how much income those different sources are going to be able to provide you. So we need to be able to start there. Then we want to look at a budget. Here at our retirement firm, it's not uncommon that people come in and they don't have a budget. They don't know exactly what they spend on different items per month. When you're working, for the most part, people just know I have enough money to cover my bills, and so therefore I guess I'm covering my budget. In retirement, you need to have a little bit more specificity behind the budget, knowing what that is. If you haven't worked through that before, there's different sources and technology to help you do that. But we have to be able to identify how much money are you going to need in your retirement years. So once we identify the budget and the sources of income, then we need to list out and identify any debt that you carry. Do you have a mortgage? If you have a mortgage, what's your monthly mortgage payment along with property taxes and insurance? And then also, when is that mortgage going to be paid off? Because at some point, that amount of income you need may come off, and that's either additional spending that you get or less money that you're going to need to pull off your investments. Car debt, credit card debt, all of that. We need to be able to identify those debts, how much you pay for that, and then again, more importantly, when will those debts be paid off? Then we want to be able to list out what we call hard expenses. Now, this is part of the budget. Hard expenses are things like your utility bills, your water bills, your cell phone bill, your cable bill. How much money on average do you spend on groceries, gas, things of that nature. Here in our area, we run thousands of retirement analysis each and every year. If you have no debt, okay, so factoring the debt out, if you have no debt, it isn't uncommon that most families will need around $2,000 to $3,000 per month just to cover their mandatory living expenses. Okay, this doesn't include going out to eat, your trips, your travel, hair, nails, any of that. This is just what does it cost me to run my household. So that's on average around $2,000 to $3,000 here in Nashville. Then we need to identify the income gap. Okay, so as an example, if your Social Security is $5,000 a month and your total income need net, right, net after taxes, your total income need is $8,000 a month, we need to be able to pull $3,000 from somewhere to be able to support your current lifestyle. So we need to be able to identify that first and foremost. It's the most important component to having a successful retirement plan, is really having a buttoned up income plan and knowing those numbers. We have to know our numbers. Once you've identified sources of income, the budget, our expenses, and the income gap, then we can actually back ourselves into our estimated tax liability. So if the net number is $8,000, are you able to identify how much on top of that do we need to draw to make sure that we're covering taxes? Social Security is taxable, pensions are taxable, rental income is taxable. If you're pulling money off of 401k or IRA investments, those are taxable. And so we need to make sure that we have a tax plan to estimate how much our tax liability is, because again, all we're doing so far is working off of net numbers. Start with the net number, you can back your way into the gross. So once we've identified all of the areas of income planning that you need to have, then we go into investments. Okay, so if we know that we're going to need $3,000 a month from our investments, we need to go in and have a very firm understanding of what our current investment allocation looks like. What is our current risk level? There's two phases of your life when it comes to investing. Number one is your accumulation years. That's what so many people are familiar with, honestly get pretty good at. You're in a 401k, it offers different funds, you diversify in those funds, you're putting money in on a weekly, bi-weekly, or monthly basis, and so you're automatically averaging into the market in the highs and lows, which is the best thing you can do. And so that's your accumulation years, where you want to be growth focused. Our main objective is to grow and maximize our money to one day be able to feel confident enough to retire. So accumulation, again, high growth, market volatility, the ups and downs, although those are never fun to experience, when you're in your accumulation years, when you're still working, if the market went down like it did in 2008, and you were still working, even though it wasn't fun to look at your 401k balances, if you kept your head down and continued to invest in that 401k while the market was going down in 2008, when the market did recover and you were continuing to invest, investment balances skyrocketed out of the 2008 crash. And along the way, even though the balance was low, it didn't impact your ability to have a paycheck. Every month, you went to work, you had a paycheck, you paid your bills, and then you managed your way through the market by averaging in, contributing, things of that nature. So the accumulation years are relatively simple for the most part. Again, pick some good growth funds, add money on a regular basis, and over time, organically, you'll see those investments grow. And so many people get pretty good at that. Now, when it comes to retirement, or what we call the distribution phase of life, it's completely different. And for everybody out there, the distribution phase of life, unless you've already been retired once, like Brett Favre or somebody like that who decided to retire 5 times, you only retire once in your life. And what that means is if you've never retired before, you're entering into new stages of your life that are foreign and unfamiliar. The distribution phase of life carries 2 different components. You do want a portion of your investments always out there in a position of growth. trying to achieve the high rates of return to offset inflation, cover additional expenses, buy new vehicles, do home improvements, things like that, right? So we need some money out there that's always growing. But then there's this income portion, right? How do you support income from investments that are variable, right? If you're just using the stock market, there's no downside risk mitigation. Even bonds carry risk, as in this year in 2023 where we're standing today. And last year, bonds were down around 12%. So even though they were lost less than the market lost, they still lost money. When it comes to your investment mix in retirement, what we've found to be successful, and we've done this for over 27 years, is you want to make sure that the money that you're going to need for income is in a position that's predictable, reliable, and has no downside market risk to it, right? Think about this. You've heard the saying, you're never going to go to Vegas and gamble the rent money, right? So in retirement, we want to do the same thing. I'm not willing to gamble and take risks on the portion of money that I know I'm going to need for income in those retirement years. So as you get closer to retirement, it's not uncommon that people do go a little more conservative in their investment style, but I want to take that one step further and really allocate more with purposeful investing, with a portion of that for growth and a portion of that in something that's principal protected, still getting a reasonable rate of return. Thankfully today, that's a little bit easier with money markets and CDs and things like that averaging over 5% with no real downside market risk tied into that. And so we need those investments working together, both differently, but to achieve a common goal. Again, distribution equals growth and principal protection for income. So let me give you an example of how this would work. So we're going to call this couple Bill and Carla, both 65 years old, both retired here in Middle Tennessee. Also, we're going to assume they did very well saving and they have no debt going into retirement. Again, this is just an example. They both get Social Security, and that'll be $2,500 a month for each of them. Now, we have the ability to run a Social Security analysis for you as to when you should turn on Social Security. In this analysis, we're just going to assume they retire and decided to turn on their Social Security. That's going to be $2,500 a month each, or $5,000 per month. So we've identified the source of income they're going to have. Their budget was $8,000 per month. That covered trips, travel, spending, things of that nature. So $3,000 a month is going to come off of the investments. Now, in this scenario, I told you earlier that we need to identify the tax liability. And so when you included $60,000, $5,000 a month of Social Security, and their need of $3,000 a month, their total tax liability was still kept them in around a 12% tax bracket, which is pretty nice to be earning around $100,000 a year and only paying a 12%, and that's on the high side. So we needed to pull $40,000 gross off their portfolio. Again, they have $1 million portfolio. We need $40,000 annually to support that income gap. And so using an allocation similar to what I mentioned, we're going to assume this client is kind of middle of the road. We'll call them a moderate investor. So they were comfortable having half of their portfolio in a position of growth during the retirement years. In this scenario, we always run the rates of return at very conservative numbers. Even though we're out there targeting 8 to 10% on our growth money, maybe 10 to 12% on our growth money, in our illustration, I'm going to use 6.5% as the rate of return that we're using. Just the S&P 500, if you look historically, has been averaging around 9% a year for the last however many 80 to 100 years. So 6.5% is a relatively conservative investment on growth money. Then on that money for the conservative piece or the protected piece, we're using 3.5%. I mentioned earlier, you can get 5+ today. But what happens when the Fed lowers rates and those interest rates go back down some? We want to make sure that we're using returns that are reasonable and also a way to stress test this. We're not looking at the best case scenario. I want to look at, can you retire in the worst case scenario? So we're using 6.5% on the growth and we're using 3.5% on the conservative. So what we're doing is we're pulling $40,000 a year off that $500,000 that's in the protected allocation. And at 3.5% return, that bucket of money is going to last 16 years for them in retirement. That puts them at age 81 in their retirement years. So we get 16 years of time. Okay, that's an important phrase I want to talk through. Time. Why do I need time? Well, if you're going to be a growth investor in the market, the one thing we know is to get an average rate of return is you don't get that same return every single year. Some years it's more, some years it's less, some years it's negative. It's an average. So what do we need to be able to obtain an average rate of return? It's time. What do we do if the market goes down one year? Like it did last year in 2022, the market was down 19%. Well, the worst thing we can do in retirement is ever be a forced seller in a down market. So the growth money, if allocated for appropriately, that client with $500,000 in growth that wasn't touching it and didn't need that money for another 16 years had the ability to let that money recoup and recover this year. And so they bought time in retirement to be a growth investor, to seek higher rates of return, and they were able to do that by having a conservative or principal protected allocation. If the market goes down, that never impacts my paycheck because I'm using investments that didn't go down when the market went down for income. That's a key component. That income we're pulling, that's paycheck money, that's rent money, and again, we're not going to gamble that. So 16 years of time it bought them, which means they had $500,000 that can sit out there, and at just a reasonable conservative 6.5% return by the time the income bucket was running low, their growth bucket had accumulated all the way back up to $1.369 million. So they started with $1 million, they drew income off of it for 16 years, and 16 years later they've got $1.69 million, more than when they started. And I know there's a lot of naysayers out there going, well, Dan, you didn't factor in inflation and all these things. I mentioned earlier, this is a simple concept I wanted to walk through. All over those 16 years, though, their Social Security would have been getting some cost of living adjustments. And if I start with $1 million and I end with $1.369 million, I've got $369,000 extra dollars I could have spent along the way to help offset inflation, additional expenses, and still had my original $1 million that I started with. And so if that's your scenario, or you're curious about what that would look like for you, maybe you have less than $1 million, maybe you have more than $1 million. Here at our firm, we offer a free retirement analysis. Included in that analysis will be an income plan, a health insurance plan, a tax plan, along with an investment risk analysis. For more information, click the link below or give us a call.